Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Angel, the Egyptian Spy Who Saved Israel, by Uri Bar-Joseph, translated by David Hazoni, narrated by Neil Shah. Prologue: The Funeral and the Mystery. July is a hot month in Cairo, and July 1st, 2007, was no exception. The narrow streets were crowded with millions of sweaty pedestrians, the crowd swelling with children on their summer vacation. The Khan al-Khalili Bazaar was flooded with housewives who hurried to make their daily shopping, and with tourists who came to watch the magic of the famous Oriental market. And Cairo's 80,000 taxi drivers honked and honked as they struggled to cut a path through the city's congested streets. Very little of this mess penetrated the mosque of Omar bin Abdulaziz in the city's modern suburb of Heliopolis. The hundreds of mourners attending a funeral being held in the mosque wore unusually formal suits and ties, or military uniforms. They were the elite of Egypt's political, security, and business establishments, and they all had come to pay their last respects to a man who was one of them, a family member, friend, colleague, and business partner for many years, Dr. Ashraf Marwan. Marwan died 4 days earlier, when he mysteriously fell from the balcony of his fifth-floor luxury apartment not far from Piccadilly Circus in London. In 1966, he married President Gamal Abdel Nasser's daughter, Mona. Joining the presidential family paved his way to the top echelon of Egyptian politics, first as an official in Nasser's presidential office, and later, after Nasser's death, as a close advisor to President Anwar Sadat. After he left public service, he used his contacts in the Arab world in order to build a shady business career and had been living in London since 1981. Marwan's body arrived in Cairo a day earlier. Dr. Zakaria Azmi, the head of the office of President Hosni Mubarak, and Ahmed Shafiq, the Minister of Civil Aviation, waited at the airport for the coffin. Now, at the mosque, Gamal Jimmy Mubarak, the president's son and heir apparent, was comforting Marwan's widow and her 2 sons. This was not merely an official gesture, but a personal one as well. Gamal was a close friend of Ashraf Marwan's son, and the two frequently visited each other's homes. The Marwans attended Gamal Mubarak's spectacular wedding of Sharm el-Sheikh at the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula that had taken place less than 2 months earlier. President Mubarak himself was participating in an African summit in Accra, Ghana, and could not attend the funeral, but he released an official statement describing Marwan as a true patriot of his country. Mubarak added that he was personally aware of the great service that the departed had rendered for his country. General Omar Suleiman, the strongman of Egypt's intelligence and military establishment, who attended the funeral, provided the official authorization to the presidential declaration of Marwan's unquestionable patriotism. The legislative branch was represented by the Speaker of the Egyptian Parliament and the head of the upper house. Senior generals of the armed forces stood next to business tycoons, and academicians, including the president of Cairo University, were seen talking with senior journalists such as the head of Al-Ahram, Egypt's leading daily. Dr. Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi, the former Grand Mufti of Egypt who in 1996 was nominated by Mubarak to be the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University, the oldest institute of its kind in the Muslim world, led the religious ceremonies. Close by were Marwan's family members. The widow, Mona, was dressed in a dark, elegant dress, her head covered by a veil. The firstborn son, Gamal, who like many members of his generation was given Nasser's first name, stood next to her, and next to him stood her younger son, Hani. Hani was married to the daughter of Amr Musa, Egypt's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and, in 2007, the Secretary of the Arab League. Musa himself was not seen at the ceremony. Despite a well-known animosity between Mona and the rest of Nasser's family, her brothers and sister came to pay their last respects. None of Anwar Sadat's family was present, however. This was quite a surprise, as some of Cairo's journalists noted, since prior to his assassination in October 1981, Sadat and his wife Jehan were known to be close friends of Ashraf and Mona Marwan. Relatively speaking, however, the absence of Jehan Sadat and her daughters from the funeral was inconsequential. As some of the mourners surely sensed, the honor paid to their former colleague was no more than a facade, covering up a very painful truth, that despite all the official recognition, the man they were burying was in fact no Egyptian patriot at all. He was rather the worst traitor in their nation's history. Since the early 1990s, it had been known that the Israeli Mossad had a miraculous source at the heart of Egypt's strategic nervous system in the years that led up to the 1973 October War, the most intensive war in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Some people, such as Major General Eli Zeira, chief of Israel's military intelligence, who published his war memoirs in 1993, claim that the source was actually a double agent who betrayed the Mossad at the most critical moment, thus enabling the Arab armies to surprise Israel on Yom Kippur, the most sacred Jewish holiday. But there were others, with first-hand knowledge of the events no less reliable than Zeira, who dismissed the double agent theory and firmly believed that without the source's last-minute warning, Israel would likely have lost the war. As time passed, additional details concerning the identity of the spy and his activities had become known. In 2001, he was identified as being exceptionally close to both President Nasser and President Sadat, and as the one who was allegedly nicknamed, by the few Israelis who knew who he was, the son-in-law. Egyptian journalists actually asked Marwan if he was the famous spy. When Marwan denied the claim, Aaron Bregman, an Israeli historian at King's College in London, who played a major role in exposing his identity, confirmed to an Egyptian journalist that the miraculous Mossad source was indeed Marwan. Marwan himself kept denying the accusations, but in the wake of a court ruling in Tel Aviv on June 7, 2007, that affirmed that he was indeed the famous spy, Marwan began to feel the rope tightening around his neck. 3 weeks later, he was dead. At least a few who attended the funeral, such as General Omar Suleiman, knew very well who gave the order to get rid of Marwan and why. After all, the violent death of Marwan saved the Egyptian leadership the embarrassment that would have been involved in putting him on trial and publicly admitting that a prominent member of the Egyptian ruling elite, a man whose wife was a daughter of the legendary Nasser, whose first son was a good friend and business partner of the likely heir of President Mubarak, and whose second son was married to the daughter of Amr Musa, had been a Mossad spy at the height of the Egyptian-Israeli conflict. Following the fall of the Mubarak regime in early 2011, the question of who gave the order to liquidate Marwan was answered as well. According to the Egyptian magazine Roz al-Yusuf, it was none other than Mubarak himself, the man who, following Marwan's mysterious death, told reporters, "I do not doubt his loyalty." On May 10, 2009, CBS's 60 Minutes investigated the rise and fall of Ashraf Marwan and the controversy surrounding his death. At the very end of the episode, titled The Perfect Spy, CBS's Steve Croft summed up by posing the toughest question this way. So in the end, who did Ashraf Marwan really betray? And who finally killed him? If the truth wasn't buried with him, it is most likely buried somewhere in a top-secret vault. This book unveils the truth, and in order to get to it, we have to go back to Cairo, into the year 1944, when it all began. Chapter 1. Cairo, 1944 to 1970. Beginnings. Mohammed Ashraf Abu al-Wafa Marwan, known simply as Ashraf Marwan, was born on February 2, 1944, in the home of his family at 5 Al-Hakma Street in Cairo's Manshiat al-Bakri district. It was then, and remains today, a middle-class neighborhood in the new section of the capital. Marwan's family came from the best Egyptian stock. On his mother's side, he was part of the Al-Fayyad clan, which owned property in the village of Sa el-Hajar in Garbia province, an agricultural district in the Nile Delta north of Cairo. His father's family came from the village of Sohaga in Minya province, about 150 miles south of Cairo. The Marwan family was one of the most honorable clans in the region. Many of its members continue to live there today. It was Ashraf Marwan's grandfather, Muhammad Ahmed Marwan, who moved his branch of the family to Cairo. A graduate of Al-Azhar University, the oldest and most important school of Islamic law and theology in the Arab world, he rose to become the chief of the Sharia courts in Egypt. Ashraf Marwan's father, Abu al-Wafa Marwan, was a career officer in the Egyptian military. He started out as junior-level officer in the army of King Farouk and worked his way up the military ladder until retiring during the 1970s with the rank of Major General. In his final posting, he served as deputy commander of the Egyptian Republican Guard, an army division mostly responsible for internal security. Despite the fact that Ashraf Marwan and his family were in Cairo, they remained in contact with the village of their origins and would travel there for visits and family celebrations. According to villagers, it was Ashraf himself who ensured, during the 1970s, that Sohaga became the first village in the area to be connected to the electrical grid. For this, and for the warmth and support that Marwan's family gave the village over the years, they are grateful to this day. There was nothing especially unusual about Marwan's upbringing. Together with his brother Hani and two younger sisters, Mona and Azza, he grew up in a typical middle-class home in Cairo. In July 1952, when he was 8 years old, Egypt witnessed the revolution of the Free Officers Movement, which brought to power Gamal Abdel Nasser, the man who, in a few short years, would become the most revered leader in the Arab world. Though Marwan's father was a senior officer, he was in no way connected to the coup, but the family grew close to the new leadership nonetheless, because many of its leading figures came to live in their neighborhood shortly after coming to power. Nasser and his family had already lived in Manshiat al-Bakri for a few years, and quite a few of the free officers now moved there as well. It quickly became known as the nerve center of political power in the new regime. Throughout his childhood, Marwan attended schools in the same neighborhood, 6 years at the Manshiat al-Bakri Elementary School, 3 at the Al-Halfa Middle School, and finally at Kubri al-Kuba High School, where he majored in science. As was the norm in Egypt, schools were tuition-free, but the family had to pay for school books, as well as other expenses, such as health insurance. His high school studies were intensive, 7 or 8 hours per day, including 7 weekly class hours of math, 5 of English, 4 of French, and 3 each of chemistry, biology, and a third scientific discipline of his choosing. Already at this stage, many of Marwan's outstanding qualities became evident, especially the sparkling intellect that earned him notably high grades that gained him admission into the Army's elite academic reserve. That program allowed him to defer his military service and to enroll in a bachelor's degree program in chemistry at Cairo University in Giza. His studies included a special officers training program, which he completed with the rank of second lieutenant. In 1965, he finished his degree and began serving as an officer and chemical engineer in the Egyptian military industry. Despite his intensive course of study, Marwan found time to read prodigiously about subjects far outside his field, particularly economics, banking, and finance. People who remember him from that period describe him as tall, attractive, and friendly, someone who knew how to get the most out of life. 2 close friends from his college days, Mohammed Fakhri and Essam Siam, studied with him in the academic reserves. Siam chose a military career and eventually attained the rank of Major General. He also built a successful career as a soccer commentator and referee on the international level, and served for years on the soccer federations of Egypt and Africa. During their time together in the mid-1960s, the three regularly enjoyed the nightlife of Cairo. On Fridays, when there were no classes, they often traveled together to Alexandria, where they tanned on the beach, swam in the sea, and strolled the promenade. Ashraf Marwan's best energies, however, were spent on the tennis court. He was an enthusiastic member of the Heliopolis Sporting Club, just half a mile from his parents' home. It was here, at the age of 21, that he met the woman who would be both his wife and his springboard up the Egyptian hierarchy. Mona Abdel Nasser was the president's daughter. She was born in January 1947, 2 years after her parents were married, and a year after the birth of their first daughter, Hoda. Hoda's name, which is related to the Arabic word hadiya, or gift, was given by her mother, Tahia, to express their gratitude for the baby despite the fact that they had wanted a son. After Mona, the Nassers went on to have 3 sons: Khaled, who would one day enter politics and be accused of conspiring to assassinate Israeli and American diplomats; Abdel Hakim, and Abdel Hamid. Mona was 18 years old, studying at the American University in Cairo, and still living with her parents, when she first met Ashraf Marwan. Life in the Nasser household was far from simple. In the mid-1950s, when the Egyptian leader first blazed his way onto the political stage, he quickly became a kind of messianic figure for the masses who saw him as one of them and, simultaneously, as a wondrously talented leader who would take them out of their collective squalor and lead them into a new era of national pride and prosperity. His impressive early achievements, evicting the British from the Suez Canal in 1954, cutting a major arms deal with the Soviet Union in 1955, nationalizing the canal in 1956, and standing strong in the face of the tripartite aggression of the Israelis, French, and British during the Suez Crisis a few months after that, confirmed and entrenched his status at home and abroad. His agrarian reforms, begun shortly after he took office, as well as other initiatives suggesting a more equitable distribution of wealth, testified to his radical political worldview and gave his regime, beginning around 1960, a socialist overtone never before heard in the Arab world. Graced with a personal charm that appealed to leaders and ordinary folk alike, and guided by a pan-Arabist worldview coupled with his own impressive political and diplomatic insights that enabled him to deftly overcome both internal and external challenges, Mona's father turned himself, in just a few years, from an unknown Egyptian army officer into the greatest Arab leader since Saladin. The fact that the historical Saladin was not actually an Arab, but a Kurd, mattered little. We cannot know just how much of Nasser's legendary status affected his family life, or how it affected the way he raised his children. As opposed to other Arab rulers, especially his predecessor, King Farouk, Nasser never took advantage of his status for personal gain. His family continued living in the same house they bought in Manshiat al-Bakri immediately after he married Tahia in 1944, and Tahia continued to run the household on her husband's relatively modest government salary. The family continued driving the same little Austin that Nasser bought when he was still a teacher at the military academy. In 1954, when the car was on its last legs, they replaced it with a Ford they bought on installments. In a society where graft was the grease that made the whole machine run, Nasser was a paragon of probity. At the same time, he clearly knew that his colleagues in the Egyptian leadership, especially his good friend Abdel Hakim Amr, had their hands in the till, and he saw their corruption as a weakness that he could take advantage of for his own ends. Nasser, moreover, felt a sincere revulsion towards the very wealthy. He once paid a visit to the Al Jazeera Sporting Club, a preferred hangout for Egyptian aristocrats, but the atmosphere there was so repugnant to him that he refused ever to return. He also was unwilling to give his children any unusual privileges, and he always reminded them of their origins in the village of Beni Mur, on the banks of the Nile. "I am very proud that I come from a poor villager family," he told them, "and history will bear witness to the fact that Nasser was born to a poor family, and I promise that he will live and die as a poor man." His elder daughter recalls that her life was an ordinary life of an Egyptian girl of her generation. His son Khaled insisted that he never received any special consideration in his own political career. Of course, there can be no doubt that Nasser's children were acutely aware of their changed status when their father came to power. True, they continued to attend the Kaumea school in Giza, where children of the new elites went, and to play with the same friends. But because Nasser preferred working at home and receiving foreign dignitaries there rather than at the palaces of Cairo, life in their house was anything but normal. They built additions to the house more than once, both to make room for their growing family and to make it easier for foreign leaders and their staffs to work effectively. The house soon gained a tennis court, a library, and more. On occasion, when the guests were especially interesting, Nasser's children met them as well. One photograph showing Khaled with the world boxing champion, Muhammad Ali, offers a snapshot of their life. Obviously, their father's status had some impact on the children's lives, but clearly the impact was limited and varied from child to child. That emerges most clearly in the different experiences of Mona, Marwan's beloved, and her older sister, Hoda. Hoda was, by all accounts, the more serious and intelligent of the two. Her school teachers, who on Nasser's orders denied her any preferential treatment, later recalled her innate smarts, dedication, and work ethic, which enabled her to finish at the top of her class. Hoda's life story took what must have appeared to many as its most natural course: a bachelor's degree in economics and political science, and then a doctorate in political science from Cairo University. During her studies, she and her husband, Hatem Sadek, started working at the Center for Strategic Studies established at the Al-Ahram newspaper in 1968. Her family ties clearly helped her get the job, but her personal achievements justified it as well. Because she was so talented, and because of the career path she chose, many saw her as a natural successor to her father, an Egyptian answer to Indira Gandhi. But Hoda, it turned out, had other plans. She preferred the academic life, and her political potential was never realized. Mona, on the other hand, was not as bright as her older sister, and a few people who knew her during that period remember her as a frivolous girl who, more than anything else, enjoyed a good party. She showed little interest in politics or anything requiring intellectual effort. As opposed to her sister, whose grades in high school cut her path to an academic career at the top university in Egypt, Mona's grades were mediocre. Nevertheless, after high school, she wished to join her sister and study economics and political science at Cairo University, but did not have the required grades. Although the Minister of Higher Education and the university's authorities agreed to accept Mona, Nasser rejected any favors for his daughter and sent her to study at the American University in Cairo. He had little choice. During the 1960s, it was a private institution with a relatively poor reputation, and the students who enrolled there were those with parents of means, but who lacked the grades needed to get into Cairo University. Nasser himself, so he claimed, had trouble covering Mona's tuition. Mona's habits changed little when she got to college. Friends of hers from that period recall that she spent at least as much time at the Heliopolis Sporting Club's tennis courts and in coffee shops as she did in class. In the summer of 1965, after completing her first year of college, she met Ashraf Marwan. Within a year, they were married. It was not a chance encounter. Marwan's younger sister Aza, with whom he was very close, was Mona's age and a good friend of hers, and she made the introduction after telling Mona all about her handsome and talented brother. According to the memoirs of Tahia, Mona's mother, they first met at the Heliopolis Sporting Club, which at the time was one of the most trendy meeting spots for Egyptian youths from good families. According to Mona herself, however, she met Marwan on the beach, apparently in Alexandria. Wherever it was, two things are clear. First, Mona fell in love with Marwan right then and there. The girl's heart was swept away by his tall and trim figure, his fine features, and his expensive clothes. Second, what attracted the handsome and ambitious young man was not Mona's looks, her wit, or any other personal qualities. It was simply her family. He was 21 years old, hungry and ambitious, and had set his sights on greatness. A marriage to the daughter of Nasser would put him directly on course to fulfill his destiny. Yet while most of our sources see this as his main reason for dating Mona, there are those, however, who insist that Marwan genuinely fell in love with her. Mona told her father about her new boyfriend not long after they started dating. She apparently did not hide her desire to marry and start a family with him. Nasser received by this stage many requests for the hands of his daughters from the sons of rich and noble persons. He refused them all. He suspected anyone who showed romantic interest in Mona, and he wanted to hear more. She told him about Marwan, about how he came from a Saidi family, that is, from the best Egyptian lineage, and that his father, Abu al-Wafa Marwan, was an army colonel. Nasser had heard enough. He immediately ordered a comprehensive inquiry into Ashraf Marwan. The man responsible was Sami Sharaf, Nasser's chief of staff and one of the most powerful men in Egypt, and who, in years to come, would play a crucial role in Marwan's story. The report Sharaf sent to Nasser was not flattering. It emphasized Marwan's ambitiousness and his love for the high life, while doubting the sincerity of his feelings for Mona. For Nasser, a Puritan in his personal life who was already worried about his daughter's lifestyle, this sort of suitor was not a positive choice, to say the least. Nasser was about to marry Hoda off to a serious, learned, modest gentleman, and her groom was clearly a better model for the kind of man he would want Mona to marry as well. Having received Sharaf's report, Nasser sat Mona down for a heart-to-heart talk, with the aim of convincing her not to marry Ashraf Marwan. Mona refused to listen. She had made up her mind and insisted that Nasser enter into negotiations with Marwan's father over the terms of their engagement. Nasser rebuffed her repeated requests, but in the end, the greatest Arab leader since Saladin was bested by his even more stubborn daughter. He agreed to meet Ashraf Marwan's father. The engagement agreement reached between the two families did not strictly follow tradition. The groom's family would pay a dowry of 1,000 Egyptian pounds, about $100, but no amount was set to be paid in the event of a divorce. Neither did the groom's family buy jewelry for the bride, as tradition would have it. Instead, Marwan gave Mona a diamond ring that had previously belonged to his mother, and to her mother before her. The wedding was held in July 1966 in the Nasser's home. As opposed to other family events, this was a grand affair. Years later, Mona recalled that her father had felt a need to host a large event because Hoda's wedding the previous year had been more modest, with many important people left off the invitation list. This time, invitations were extended not only to close family members, but also to classmates of the bride and groom, as well as the entire top political echelon of Egypt, including members of the Revolutionary Council. The marriage contract was written by the Madhun, the official who handles marriages and divorces, of Cairo, who in 1944 had officiated the wedding of Mona's parents. War Minister Abdel Hakim Amr, an old friend of Nasser's, signed as a witness to the marriage contract, as did Prime Minister Zakaria Mohayeddin, who was one of the leaders of the Free Officers movement. Photos and movies from the ceremony show Nasser sitting with his wife to his right, his son Khaled to his left, and Khaled's younger brother, Abdel Hakim, to Khaled's left. Ashraf and Mona sat opposite her parents, next to Hoda and her husband. After hearing the recitation of the first surah of the Quran and a few other texts, Nasser gave his blessing to the young couple. Marwan, in his dapper gray suit, sky-blue tie, and white shirt, stood up and embraced his new father-in-law. But not everything was rosy. In the middle of the ceremony, Mona suddenly turned to her father and demanded a pair of earrings as a...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?